Information and ideas questions are some of the hardest to conquer on the SAT. You'll often find yourself facing multiple answer choices that seem completely reasonable, and yet you obviously know that only one of them is right. In this video, we're going to pick apart this question right here from the March SAT. It's a great example of this exact situation because, as you'll see, the text isn't especially challenging. But then you get to the answer choices, and yeah, you're reminded of just how much you hate your life. The answer choices are long, convoluted, and packed with double and triple negatives. They either all seem more or less fine, or they all seem completely wrong. It's a tough spot that you are 100% sure to face, so I want to show you a solid approach that will make this otherwise very hard question pretty much trivial to solve, even if you don't fully get what the answer choices are saying. And as a bonus, we'll look at some tactics and tools you can employ to disentangle convoluted sentences for situations where the simple approach doesn't quite cut it. But just before we jump in the description, you will find a link to a comprehensive PDF document on this exact topic. It's absolutely free to download, so you should definitely give it a whirl. And of course, don't forget to keep Tanya happy by giving us a like and subscribing if you haven't already. Okay, back to the main show. To solve this question, we're going to apply a simple 5-step process you can use on just about any science-based question on the SAT. Here it is. Step 1. Find the main claim. This will usually be located near the end of the paragraph, and it will include the most important concepts and relationships. If you can solve the entire problem with just this one sentence, you should. Step 2. Test the model against the answer choices. At this point, your instinct will probably be to dive back into the passage and understand it better. Resist that instinct. Instead, go straight to the answer choices and try to evaluate them using nothing but the model you just built. On easier questions, the model presented in the passage will be self-contained and simple to understand, so the correct answer will match that main idea pretty much perfectly. And in those cases, reading the rest of the passage is a waste of time and a massive risk. However, on harder questions, the model won't be enough. You might find that all 4 answer choices introduce concepts that aren't clearly connected to your model, or that an answer hinges on a term from the claim that you haven't clearly defined. Only in those situations, and I mean only in those situations, should you go back to the text. Okay, step 3. Define missing or vague terms. If you do have to go back, do not read aimlessly. Search the text with the sole objective of defining key terms in the answer choices and the missing pieces of your model. Nothing more. The biggest danger here is what I call semantic drift, which is when you start out with the right main claim, but as you read the paragraph, your correct interpretation starts to drift into new and incorrect territory. More on this a little later. Step 4. Eliminate clearly irrelevant answers. Now that the claim is clear and its components well defined, you go back to the answer choices and eliminate any options that don't directly, and I mean directly, connect to the structure of the claim. If an option mentions something in the paragraph that isn't a specific component of the main claim, that answer choice is wrong. It's that simple. Step 5. Match logic clause by clause. Fine, sometimes it's not actually that simple, because on the hardest questions, you will face 2 options that seem utterly feasible. And this is where you really need to put your brain into high gear and read like a lawyer, because SAT questions are not TikTok posts. They are not designed to be easily consumed. They do not spoon feed you the main takeaway. They are sneaky snippets of copy whose sole purpose is to keep you out of the college of your dreams. So it's your job here to read clause by clause, unraveling double negatives and thinking carefully if 2 words are truly synonyms or if your brain just wants them to be. This approach is blazingly fast because for the vast majority of questions, you'll never get to step 5. On the easiest questions, you won't even get past step 2. But even on quite difficult questions, if you've taken the time to carefully consider the main claim, you'll mostly be able to solve the problem after step 4, without ever needing to enter into the insanity of deconstructing sentences clause by clause. On the hardest questions, however, that final step, not gonna lie, will take you a considerable amount of time and mental energy. So unless this is your last question in the test, you should probably mark it for review and come back to it once you've worked through the whole module. So, like I said, we're going to apply this process to this question right here. But before we do, I want to show you what a bad strategy looks like, so you can see for yourself the kind of mess it lands you in. Here it goes. You read the text and make note of the concepts and relationships as you go. Not too challenging, right? You probably feel like you've got the gist of it, so you go to the answer choices. For the sake of the video, let's start with answer choice D, which is probably the only obviously wrong answer here. Answer D says that increasing crop variety while implementing other diversification practices is more expensive than first implementing crop variety and then implementing the others. This is clearly not relevant to our bullet points, so let's get rid of it. So far so good, but now we hit a dead end. Answer A says that increasing crop variety will likely help reverse non-agricultural biodiversity loss, which sort of matches bullet point number 2. And it goes on to say that increasing crop variety will result in smaller yields, which matches bullet point 3, because if a single crop raises yields, that implies that increasing crop variety would lower yields. So we keep A in for now, right? The first part of answer B does talk about environmental and economic considerations, which matches bullet point 4, but the trade-off is unclear. And this second part here is very confusing, to put it mildly, so let's leave it for now. Answer C seems to say that farmers who think diversification practices will not improve yields are incorrect, which kind of makes sense. The text does say that farmers can increase revenues with increased diversification practices, so farmers who think otherwise are wrong, right? At this point, you are already neck deep, and honestly, very unlikely to piece things together quickly enough to find the right answer. The problem here is that you read the text horizontally, assuming each piece of information is as important, or at least potentially as important, as the next. What you should have been doing is reading hierarchically, starting with the most important ideas and only digging into the details if you need to. This is critical. SAT questions are specifically designed to separate those who have understood a particular scientific relationship from those who haven't. So the correct answer will always be directly related to that claim. And when you read horizontally, you are almost sure to assign an inflated value to unimportant pieces of the puzzle, because your brain, like everyone else's, is biased towards ideas and words it finds familiar. And whatever it is you find familiar will probably not line up exactly with the main claim. And whatever idea you have about the topic, whatever conclusion you naturally draw from a quick cursory reading, will probably not be directly relevant to the main claim. It may come close, it may be an utterly reasonable observation to make or idea to explore were this the real world, but the real world, this is not. So let's see the better way. The first step is to find the main claim and reduce it to a simple structured model. In our case, the key sentence appears at the end of the passage describing the study's findings. Using multiple diversification practices concurrently had greater potential for improving both non-agricultural biodiversity and yields than using a single strategy did. We can rewrite this as a clean model. Using multiple practices can improve both biodiversity and yields. Using a single strategy may not improve biodiversity and yields. This seems pretty simple, so we go back to the answer choices. Yes, we can eliminate D fairly easily for the same reasons mentioned earlier, but for the rest of it, because this is a harder question, we get stuck. Answers A, B, C, and D all mention crop variety, which isn't in our model, but appears to be an example of a diversification practice. Answers A and C mention a single crop, which isn't in our model either, but it's not especially clear how this new term fits in, if it fits in at all. So overall, there's no answer choice that obviously fits our main claim, at least not after a quick first pass. So we go back to the text. But our goal now is clear. We need to know how crop variety and single crop fit or don't fit our model. Rereading now, we see that growing a single crop means the same thing as not using any diversification strategy at all. We also see that, indeed, increasing crop variety is one of 4 diversification strategies listed in the brackets here. And this is where many of you fall victim to what I call semantic drift, which, as I mentioned earlier, is when you start with the correct model in mind, but as you read more of the text, you drift from the central meaning of the main claim into irrelevant territory. Because you must not forget, our model is still the same. It is still entirely focused on comparing the effect of using a single strategy, such as increasing crop variety, with multiple strategies. If you make the catastrophic mistake, however, of expanding the model to include the single crop scenario, like so, you've fallen victim to semantic drift. Yes, adding this factor into our model makes some sense in the broader context of the paragraph, but the main claim simply does not mention the effect of cultivating a single crop. So the correct answer shouldn't mention that either. Admittedly, this is really easy to get wrong. Notice how the sneaky College Board uses the word single in 2 different ways. A single strategy refers to just one diversification strategy, while cultivating a single crop refers to growing just one crop, which isn't a strategy at all. So if you're going too fast and not carefully considering what the words mean, you're going to fall for traps. And we are now ready to go back to the answer choices and eliminate options that clearly do not match the model. Choice A compares increasing only crop variety to focusing on developing a single crop. As we just saw, this is not the right comparison, so delete it and move on. Choice B is a little trickier to parse, but it doesn't obviously mention single crop at any rate, so we'll put a pin in it and come back to it in a minute. Choice C compares specializing in a single crop to focusing on crop variety, so we can delete this for the exact same reason we deleted A. And that, folks, leaves us with B, which must be, and indeed is, the right answer. And that's it. You don't need to know more. It's uncomfortable, yes, but our reasons for deleting A and C were unambiguous. And in the real test, as long as B doesn't also clearly contradict the model or present obviously irrelevant information, that's enough. But let's be real. Do you really get what this is saying? Probably not. And while you don't need to understand this to get the question right, you will need to get faster and more effective at untangling these types of tricky structures if you want to reliably score close to an 800 in the SAT reading and writing section. So what I want to do now is slow way down and pick this sentence apart clause by clause. So here we go. Let's see the main claim again and compare it to answer choice B. In this first clause, we have a few obvious matches. Agricultural diversification is equivalent to diversification practices. Environmental concerns is equivalent to non-agricultural biodiversity. Economic concerns is equivalent to yields. So we can transform the first clause into this. But what exactly is meant by the trade-off? Well, here it says that using multiple practices can improve both non-agricultural diversity and yields, but that using a single practice might not. So if farmers employ a single strategy, they may need to accept lower yields in exchange for higher non-agricultural biodiversity. They might be forced, in other words, into a trade-off between environmental and economic concerns. With this clarified, we can again simplify this first clause like so, which is already becoming significantly more readable. But we can go even further by flipping the double negatives. If we swap don't inherently for can and to choose between for both, we get this, which matches the claim almost perfectly. But we're still missing the idea that avoiding a trade-off is only true if farmers employ multiple strategies. So we move on to this clause with all the double negatives. Our first task is to resolve the word that, which is a pointing word or demonstrative that refers to something earlier in the sentence, also known as the antecedent. So when you're parsing a difficult sentence and you see a demonstrative like this, that, those, or these, or any pronoun for that matter, like it and they, you must find its antecedent. Because if you can't find the antecedent, you don't really understand the sentence yet. To figure out then what that outcome is referring to, we look for the antecedent somewhere to the left, where we find the only logical candidate, a trade-off. and our clause can now be rewritten as follows. Now let's flip the double negatives by swapping avoiding for accepting and diminish for increased, and let's again rephrase it to sound a little more natural. Much, much simpler. And we've just got this last clause here to unpack. Again, we need to ensure that the terminology is clear. Crop variety, as we saw earlier, is just one of the 4 diversification practices listed. So if farmers focus on crop variety to the exclusion of other practices, that's basically a fancy way of saying that the farmers are using only one of 4 strategies. So we can replace that whole string of words with a single strategy, like so, transforming the final clause into this, which, along with the rest, produces this much simpler version of answer choice B, a version that very clearly matches our claim. Yes, I know that that last part was a little nutty, but knowing how to read closely is a superpower that so few people ever bother to learn. And I assure you, when you get to college, you will quickly encounter texts that are far thicker and trickier than anything you have read so far. Whether you plan on becoming a doctor or a historian, reading skills will be critical to your success, because reading is thinking, and the stronger your reading skills, the stronger you will become at picking apart logical claims and at holding a universe of details in your working memory. And yes, it gets easier. It's a skill like any other, and over time, you will build the patience, persistence, and focus required to read and reread more and more challenging texts, squeezing more and more out of them with every pass, until one day you find yourself, to your great surprise, excited at the prospect of opening a very fat book full of very fat words to page 1 and getting to work.